Hi, this is Leah. This is week 6, and for our interactive advanced concept presentation, the topic is a pasta rocket. So some things that we need to understand for this experiment are combustion, which is an exothermic reaction between a fuel and an oxidant. And then we also need to know what an oxidizing gas is, which is a gas that contributes to combustion by acting as an oxygen source. So then there's just a little diagram on the side here. So if you have an oxygen source, a fuel source, and then you add heat such as like the initial flame, then you will start to have a combustion reaction. And that will be important later. So for our experiment, the materials that you need are a mason jar with a lid, hydrogen peroxide, active dry yeast, a ziti noodle, and then a flame source. So what you need to do for this experiment are first partially fill the mason jar with hydrogen peroxide, then add the yeast to the jar, then quickly place the lid onto the jar top and shake it. Then we want to place the noodle over the hole in the mason jar, ignite the top of that noodle, and then see what happens. So this is just me performing the experiment with all the steps laid out. So I put some hydrogen peroxide in the mason jar. It wasn't specific as to how much, but the video tutorial that we were provided, it looked like it was about 1/4 of the way full, so that's what I aimed for. Then I added some yeast to the jar. I placed the lid and I pressed it down so that it had somewhat of a firm seal. I placed the noodle on top and then I lit the noodle on fire. So what did I see happen? So I lit the noodle and it did stay lit. And I could see that the noodle was burning because it was turning to ash, so I did light it all the way. However, I did not see the expected result. So what should have happened? I should have seen more of a hybrid rocket effect. I did see some of the bubbling in the jar from the oxygen being produced. But when it came to the flame, it just looked like the noodle was burning. It didn't seem to have a strong rocket-like effect in the flame. So what is a hybrid rocket? It's when you have a solid combustible and a gas oxidizer put together, and it's a type of engine. So if this would have went the right way, then what should have happened was when we added the hydrogen peroxide and the yeast together, there's a chemical reaction that occurs, which is actually done by a catalyst enzyme within the yeast, which causes oxygen to form. It's basically taking that second oxygen molecule off of the hydrogen peroxide and making it more of a free oxygen source, which causes those bubbles that we saw in the mason jar. Then, once we have that oxygen being created, and we put the lid on, and we put the noodle on top, and lighted it, then we should have seen a combustion reaction. So combustion requires an oxidant and a fuel. So in this case, the oxidant was the oxygen. That's why the hydrogen peroxide and the yeast were important together to produce that extra oxygen. The fuel source was the ziti noodle. This was that solid combustible material that we needed. So once we lit that and we added that heat source and started the reaction, we should have seen this strong flame hybrid rocket effect. So some things that may have went wrong in my experiment, maybe I did not put enough hydrogen peroxide or yeast in, because the jar that I had was a decent sized jar, so maybe I needed to fill it some more. Also maybe since we are using a noodle and we're sitting over top of the hole, maybe the oxygen gas was escaping from the underneath the lid, or even escaping from underneath of the noodle, because there's not really a good seal there between the noodle and the top of the lid. So those are some things that might have went wrong. Thank you for listening.